My name is Brittany Overshiner. I'm the Beginning Farmer Program Coordinator for NOFA. My email is brittany@nofamass.org. Feel free to contact me with feedback about this webinar or with any beginning farmer questions. Before we start tonight, I would like to thank our sponsors, Frontier Natural Products, Lancaster Agriculture, and UMass Risk Management Crop Insurance Education Program for supporting the production of this series. I'd also like to thank New Entry Sustainable Farming Project and Tufts Friedman School of Nutritional Science and Policy for providing access to WebEx software we are using to host the workshop. Also, many thanks to all the NOFA staff who have helped make this workshop possible. If you are not a member of NOFA please consider joining to support our education and policy work. Visit our website to learn more. Tonight's presenter is Andrew Mefferd of One Drop Farm. He is the former high tunnel and greenhouse production researcher at Johnny Selected Seeds and the current owner of Growing for Market magazine. The format will be a presentation from Andrew to start with some participation, but most questions will be held to the end for a question and answer session. To type a question or to interact, use the chat button, which is at the top right-hand corner of your screen. You'll see it right next to the recorder button. You'll see a little box that says chat. I'm going to type a chat to everybody. And to practice, everybody who sees the chat button, if you wanted to do me a favor and type in your name and the town you farm in or the name of your farm or a little bit of information about you, I'll know that you understand how to use the chat function. If you're listening by phone, you can text a question to my phone, which I can then type into the chat function or verbally communicate to Andrew. My phone number is 857-383-7020. That's 857-383-7020. Thank you, everybody, for joining for this webinar this evening. At the end of the webinar, again, there'll be questions. So if you have any questions, please type them at the end or even throughout the conversation. If you think of a question, you can type it in. All right, Andrew, I'm going to pass this over to you. We're going to try that sharing function, and we're going to see how it goes.
Okay, thank you, Brittany. And I'd like to thank NOFA Massachusetts for having me. And this is Andrew Mefferd. I'm the editor of Growing for Market magazine. I just took that over from Lynn Basinski at the beginning of this year. And I also have a farm called One Drop Farm in central Maine, which is where I'm coming to you from today. If you're not familiar with our magazine, I urge you to check it out. It's a great resource for market growers everywhere. It's www.growingformarket.com. And we do have a great article in the upcoming August magazine about how to schedule late fall, winter, and early spring hoop house planting. So if that's of interest to you, that's something that relates to the subject matter today that you might be interested in there. So the talk that I wanted to give today, I called it Protected Culture Vegetable Production on One Drop Farm, because what I used to do is I would do trials in greenhouse vegetable research for Johnny Selected Seeds, which are the research farm of Johnny's is about half an hour away from my farm, and it's where I worked for 7 years. And so I loved that job because I got to go on a lot of farm tours and visit with a lot of growers, big, small, and research growers. And what I noticed is that they did things very differently from the way that we did things on my farm. And I would say that the way that we did things on my farm was a mashup of the way that we learned to do things, because we apprenticed on farms in 6 different states, and we originally started our farm in Pennsylvania before we moved it to Maine. So we took the best practices that we saw over the years that we were apprenticing, and we just started doing things that way on our farm. And when I got to do all the greenhouse vegetable research and all the farm visits when I was working at Johnny's, I realized that there were a lot of the best growers that I got to visit with were doing things very differently. And so what I did was take their best ideas and try them out on my own farm and see what worked. And most of the stuff that I saw, even on bigger farms, had at least some application on my own farm. And so I would like to tell you about the things that we did today. In fact, it does kind of break down into 10 tips, although I have more than 10 slides. They cover about 10 subjects, some of which you could do really quickly, maybe go out and do tomorrow. Some of them are going to be longer term planning projects, but I just want to give you some ideas. And maybe the most important thing is this presentation should take 45, 50 minutes. So I wanted to leave time for questions because I do want to see what you're interested in hearing about. So without further ado, I'll get going. The picture that you see right here, these are two of my hoop houses, in fact, and there's less snow than this right now. In fact, that's this picture here. That's more what they look like right now. They are 30 by 48 hoop houses. They have extra long sidewalls because we built these hoop houses specifically for growing vining crops like the tomatoes that you see in the one in front, and we usually have cucumbers in the other one. And so to give you an idea of the impact that these improvements had on our production, in the beginning, we were getting about a ton of tomatoes out of one of these 30 by 48 hoop houses, which I feel like was okay, but we definitely could do better because we were able to gradually double that by implementing all of these, most of these improvements. We don't do all of these things, and I'll tell you which we do and we don't, but most of them we do, and they've helped things a lot. So the first thing that we do that mostly applies to tomatoes is grafting. Grafting can increase the vigor and disease resistance so that plants can go the length of your extended season, because you got to remember that in a hoop house, your tomato growing season is much longer than it is out in the field, particularly up here in the northeastern part of the country. And this is a tip that mostly applies to tomatoes, but I know that tomatoes are one of the biggest cash crops on a lot of farms, so I feel like it's an important tip because you actually can graft eggplant, peppers, and cucumbers, but the benefits at this point are not as great as they are for tomatoes, whereas there are huge benefits for grafting tomatoes. So the two things that you get out of grafting are if you use one of the rootstocks that were bred specifically for grafting, they have a higher level of vigor than any regular fruiting variety of tomato plant. So they will make your tomato plants more vigorous, and they will also make them more disease resistant because the varieties of tomato that have been bred for rootstocks, they don't have to think about making nice fruit. So all they concentrate on is vigor and disease resistance. That's why if you look at the disease package in, let's say, one of your seed catalogs, you'll see the rootstocks have an enormous disease package because that's the main thing that they're bred to do, is to be resistant to diseases, which is a huge benefit to organic and natural growers because you don't have very many other recourses against soil-borne disease, which may build up over time in the field, or especially in hoop house soils where you may not have as long of a rotation as you do out in the field. It's also a great help for producing heirlooms because, as you may know, most heirlooms either have no or a very limited disease package. So if you get soil-borne disease, you may be out of business growing heirlooms. Whereas if you graft an heirloom tomato onto a disease-resistant rootstock, it can give it resistance to soil-borne diseases and also increase the vigor of that plant. And the vigor boost is really important because even here in the Northeast, where we have a very short season, I'll go to greenhouses all the time where you see up at the top of the plant, the vine is getting really skinny. And when the vine thins out up at the top and basically stops growing, that can be one or two or both of two things. And it can be either that there's not enough fertility, which we'll get to in a minute, or just that the plant is getting tired. It takes a lot of vigor to go the longer season in a hoop house, and one of the ways that you can ensure that your plant stays as vigorous at the end of the season as it is at the beginning is by grafting. And so one of the big improvements to our tomato production has been grafting, and that's a project in itself. I can't go into how to graft today, I do have a book coming out from Chelsea Green in January or February of this year, and I go extensively into the grafting process. And there are also good guides on the Johnny Seeds website, and there's some other free resources online if you want to teach yourself how to graft. My best suggestion is to make that a winter project and start some plants way before you actually need to plant them, and teach yourself how to graft on some plants that you don't really need to plant. But grafting has been a huge improvement in increasing our yields and the vigor of our tomato plants. So as far as if the other reason that your plants may be thinning out at the end of the season, if you put all your fertility on at the beginning of the season, your plants may have used that all up by the time that it gets to be late August or even early September, when you may still have good growing weather, especially in a hoop house. So the two things that I think are important as far as applying fertilizer and applying water are either fertigation or side dressing and pulse irrigation. So if you're not familiar with the term, fertigation is a combination of fertility and irrigation. So it means using a fertilizer injector or something else to put organic fertilizer on the crop through the drip lines. Or the other thing you can do is just side dress it on, sprinkle some fertilizer by the plants once after they're already planted. And so that's because if you put all the fertilizer that the crop were to need on at the beginning, they would probably be too fertile and be too lush and getting too much nitrogen at the beginning of the season, and then not have enough at the end of the season. And so one thing that you can do to really improve any long season crop that's going to be in the ground for an extended period of time, so that could be tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, eggplant, any other thing that you want to keep productive over a long season, is to either fertigate, so irrigate some fertilizer in there, or side dress some fertilizer on your plants, because they tend to peter out late in the season, and so getting them some more fertilizer will really help them stay vigorous until late in the season. It's definitely easier to fertigate it on because the fertilizer goes right into the roots, and there are some completely soluble organic fertilizers that you can get that will go through drip lines. The other alternative is side dressing, which can be problematic because I know I've side dressed in my greenhouse, and in the high humidity environment of the greenhouse where you're not getting any rain, it's very possible for that fertilizer just to sit on top of the soil and mold because there's nothing working it into the soil. So if you want to side dress, one way to incorporate it is to put it under landscape fabric or some other mulch if you're using mulch, or another way would be to scratch it into the soil, or to try to put the drip tape on top of it so that the water carries some of the fertility down to the roots. So the other thing that you can do as far as drip tape that may increase the health of your plants, and this works in the greenhouse. It works in the field too, but it's especially effective in the greenhouse since you don't have big rain events that are prone to overwatering your crops at random times. Although Brittany tells me you guys are in a pretty deep drought there in Massachusetts, so I guess you haven't had that problem in a while. But there is what I mean by pulse irrigation is, instead of let's say you thought your crop needed half an hour of water every day, instead of giving it the whole half hour of water at once, instead let's say you give it 3 10-minute waterings or 2 15-minute waterings. What that will do is it will keep the roots from getting flooded at one point and then being too dry at some other point of the day. And so when the roots are too wet, that tends to promote root diseases, and it also promotes splitting in tomatoes in particular. So if you do multiple small irrigations a day, you can really grow. You can grow sun gold. You can grow heirlooms or any variety that is prone to splitting. Because if you give one big watering, the plant tends to take more water than it wants at once, and it will put that water into the fruit, which will cause it to split. Whereas if you give it little bursts of water, little pulses, it'll just take that watering gradually throughout the day, and it will help with tomatoes not splitting. So another idea is to use white ground cover. So this is white ground cover in a big greenhouse. The advantage of white ground cover is that it reflects usable light back up into the plant canopy. And so here's white green cover in a small hoop house. In fact, this is one of my hoop houses right here shortly after planting. And you see what we do is we plant the tomatoes, put down the drip tape, and then put this drip tape plastic right up to the plants. And that is the white on black plastic. And the other advantage of using a white ground cover is that it helps to keep the structure cooler in the summer, because I see a lot of people who use black landscape fabric or black plastic in a greenhouse, which can be really helpful to warm up the soil in the spring. On the other hand, in a hoop house or greenhouse, you really want to use the structure to warm the climate. And the problem that I have, even up here in cold Maine, is that once we get into the late spring or summer, I have problems with the hoop house getting too hot. And so in addition to reflecting the light back up into the canopy, which is still usable to the plant, so the plants will actually photosynthesize more with white ground cover. It also keeps the hoop house cooler, which is a big help during the summer, because in periods of weather like we've had right now in late July, a lot of the hoop houses and structures are getting over 100 degrees, which is not good for the plant. So having white ground cover will help you keep the temperature more moderate. So one thing that I personally don't do, but this picture is a picture of this is a certified organic soil-based greenhouse, and the thin tube that you see going between the rows there is taking carbon dioxide out into the crop. And so one thing that can boost yields quite a bit, 25% or more, is adding carbon dioxide back into the greenhouse atmosphere. Because in a tightly packed greenhouse like the one you see here, when the plants are photosynthesizing a lot during the day, they will eat up carbon dioxide to the point where it gets lower than the level that the plants need. And really, you should think of carbon dioxide as fertilizer that can be applied through the air, because carbon dioxide is, of course, a necessary component for photosynthesis. So if the level of carbon dioxide gets too low, the plants are going to photosynthesize less. So if you have a larger greenhouse, this is an option that you can think of. In fact, this greenhouse has a carbon dioxide recapture process. What that is they take the gases when they burn at night to heat the greenhouse. They have a scrubber that takes the carbon dioxide out of the exhaust from what they're burning, and it stocks that carbon dioxide until it's needed during the day in the greenhouse, and then it releases it into the greenhouse. So it's a pretty neat way to capture the carbon dioxide that may be generated in your greenhouse anyway and put it into your plants. But that is one thing that can improve production a lot in any crop. Any crop that you boost carbon dioxide up to about 1,000 parts per million has the potential to increase production by a lot. So the next tip that I have for you is increasing planting density can really increase yield. So that's pretty obvious. If you have more plants in a structure, you're going to get a higher yield. But the way to do it isn't always completely obvious, okay? So this is a shot. This is the first year that we planted our hoop houses. So we had five rows of tomato plants with 2 liters per tomato plant. So we had a tomato vine every foot down the row. And so with that planting scheme, there's still a lot of sunlight hitting the floor of the greenhouse. And this is how we ended up. This picture looks fuzzy, but it's not, because it was taken through insect netting, which we put over the vents on our greenhouses to keep cucumber beetles and tomato hornworms and various flying pests out of the greenhouse. So now, this is how we grow now. We've doubled the density from when we started, from 5 single rows to we've gone to 5 double rows of tomato plants in a 30 by 48 hoop house. And so it's definitely a jungle in there. You can see the floor in that picture. That's the middle of the day, and there's not really any sunlight hitting the floor because it's all being intercepted by the tomato plants. So that means that you're also able to use all that sunlight because none of it is being wasted on the floor. So the easiest way to go from a lower planting density to a higher planting density is to plant 2 rows. So here's an example of a crop that's not trellised, a less high-tech kind of crop. So here are what you see here are 2 rows of bush eggplant planted together. So instead of planting a single row with each row having a walkway on either side, the reason that 2 double rows increase your planting density so much is because you have so many fewer pathways. If you think about it, having only 1 pathway on either side of a double row, there's a lot less of your hoop house used for pathways than if you have a pathway on either side of a single row. So that's one thing right there. If you're planting single rows right now, if you can make double rows, that should not have much impact on production. Production should stay about the same, whereas your density will go up a lot, and that will increase your yield by a lot. And this is a strategy that can also be used in greens crops and non-vining crops. So this is actually not a system that I've seen in this country. This is a hoop house that I got to visit in France, and what they did is they put landscape fabric that was pre-punched out over the entire greenhouse. And as you can see, they only have the 1 pathway there in the middle. And so they really increased their planting density by only having one walkway. Now, this was a wholesale, this is an organic wholesale farm in France growing in the soil. So this might not work better as well for hoop houses that have a lot of different crops that you need to tend individually, because what they would do, they would come in, plant it, and then they would just harvest from one end to the other. But if you plant a whole lot of any one thing, this is a strategy that you could use with or without the landscape fabric. Just plant very densely and harvest from one end to the other is one way you can get a lot more plants into a hoop house. So one of the other things that has helped our production a lot is using greenhouse pruning and training techniques, because when you have that increased planting density, of course you have a lot more foliage, which is interrupting airflow, which may lead to increased, particularly foliar diseases go up when you have less airflow. So one of the things that you can do about that is using greenhouse pruning techniques. Now, in this picture, I used it because it's extreme. I wouldn't advocate anybody pruning up as far as this guy is doing in this picture. But one of the things that you can do with tomatoes and eggplants, for that matter, is you can take the leaves off from the bottom of the plant up until whatever fruiting cluster you're picking. Essentially, whatever fruiting cluster is at the base of the plant. If you take all the leaves off from the bottom of the plant up to the first fruiting cluster, that will allow air to circulate down at the bottom of the hoop house, where it is most likely to stagnate. And the other thing that it'll do is your fruit will actually ripen a little bit faster, because if you think about it, when your tomatoes in particular are surrounded by leaves, it creates a little microclimate that is shadier and cooler and moister than the rest of the greenhouse or hoop house. So when you take the leaves off from around a tomato cluster, it does allow better air circulation, and it also allows the tomatoes to warm up and ripen a little faster. So using those techniques will help your crop be healthy, even if you have a very high planting density. And other things like having horizontal airflow fans. Those are those fans that hang from the trusses in your greenhouse, and usually one they just circulate the air in the greenhouse. That'll keep everything much drier, and that really helps the plants have less foliar disease and be more healthy. So another thing that we've had really good luck with is using insect netting, because on my farm we are certified organic, and so we don't have a lot of options for dealing with cucumber beetles. In particular, we have terrible problems with cucumber beetles, and then other flying pests like tomato hornworms. So this picture here is a picture of one of my hoop houses. There are brand new cucumber transplants you can see there in the hoop house. And what we've done is we put netting on the sides of the hoop house, and in this case with the cucumbers, it's to keep cucumber beetles out. And that is the netting available from Dubois Agri-Innovations in Canada. It's called ProtectNet. And so what we do is we seal all the openings of the hoop house with this ProtectNet. And it doesn't mean we don't have any cucumber beetles, but it really cuts down on the amount of cucumber beetles in there, just because they still find ways to get in, but they can't just fly in. And the problem that we have is that, especially with our cucumber, our hoop house cucumbers, is that we will transplant our cucumbers way before there are any cucumbers out in the fields. And so what happens is the cucumber beetles hatch out of the soil, and then our hoop house cukes are the only thing on the menu. So typically we have horrible cucumber beetle problems early in the season, and so that's why we put the netting on, and that helps a lot. Although the other thing that it does is it does reduce airflow. In fact, the first year that we tried this ProtectNet, we put this same treatment that you see in this picture here. We also put it on the tomato house, and it was causing the temperature to spike into the high 90s and low hundreds by the end of May and beginning of June, which is really too hot for tomatoes, because tomatoes have problems with fruit set when they get that hot. And although cucumbers can take it a little hotter than tomatoes can, as long as you keep them watered. You know, cucumbers can really take it pretty hot as long as they get enough water. So what we ended up doing is we put the netting on our cucumber house every year. Although we don't put the netting on our tomato house anymore, because we think it's more important to keep our tomatoes cool, and it's more important to keep the cuke beetles out of our cucumbers. And the thing that we really wanted to keep out of our tomatoes was tomato hornworms. So the way that we keep the tomato hornworms out of our hoop house tomatoes without netting is we just roll the sides down every night. Which at this time of year you probably don't need to roll the sides down. It's warm enough you can leave the sides up on your tomatoes 24/7 at this point. But since the tomato hornworm is the caterpillar of a night flying moth, one way that you can keep the hornworms out of your tomato crop is simply by rolling the sides down at night. The moths won't be able to get in, and you won't have any hornworms. So that does require you to do one extra thing of rolling the sides down after the sun goes down so they don't overheat, and then roll them back up before the sun comes up in the morning so they don't overheat once again. But that's an easy way to keep hornworms out of your tomatoes without putting netting on. So that's one thing that we've benefited from a lot, because we had big problems with not only the feeding damage from cucumber beetles, but also they would transmit bacterial wilt to our cucumber plants and kill whole plants at a time that way. And some years it's not such a big problem for us, and some years we've had big problems with it, and there's no way to know. So our best solution is just to keep them out in the first place. So one of the other things that it's important to do is to keep records of yield, amount sold, price, and weather, because it's impossible for you to tell if you're having a better year or a worse year than in the past if you don't keep some kind of records. For example, I wouldn't have known that we doubled our production over the course of a couple of years by implementing these improvements if I had not kept some harvest records. In fact, I was really interested. I wanted to know which varieties were producing the best and at what times of year and that kind of thing. So we keep pretty detailed harvest records, and that's how I was able to tell that we doubled our yield after a few years using these tips. And it really helps if you keep these records as a group. In fact, you can get a lot of weather programs and weather gadgets and software these days that will log the weather for you. You don't even have to do it, because of course this time of year you really don't need anything else to do. Because weather in particular is important to keep records of, because such a big impact on what's going on with your growing. You might have done everything you should have done, but if the weather's terrible as far as being too hot or being too cloudy, overcast, or whatever the case may be, that may be what's dragging your production down. And so you don't want to have to wonder. You don't want to have to think, oh, I've done everything I know to have good production this year, but it's still not good. What's going on? And maybe the whole time it's the factor that's out of your control, being the weather. So that's why it really helps to have all these other records, your production data, and then also have the weather records to compare them to, because a lot of times that can shine some light on what's going on, whether it be in a greenhouse or hoop house or even out in the field. So records are definitely important as growing tools. And my last tip for you is if you haven't already, to try using some varieties that are bred specifically for protected culture. So I use this picture of a cucumber because there are some very specific adaptations that greenhouse and hoop house cucumbers have that field cucumbers typically don't. And this plant right in front of us is a good example of that. So in cucumbers, there are two adaptations that you don't usually see in field cukes that will really help your production in a hoop house or greenhouse, and that's being parthenocarpic and being gynoecious. And so being parthenocarpic means that it will set fruit in the absence of pollen, which is important because the other gynoecious means that they're all female plants, or the plants have all female flowers on them, which is a naturally occurring feature in some cucurbits. And so the reason that they've bred greenhouse and hoop house cucumbers to be all female flowered is twofold, because for one thing, of course, the female flowers are what produce the cucumbers. If you look at a female flower on any cucurbit plant, you'll see there's a little baby cucumber or whatever your fruit is behind the flower. And so typically in cucurbits, that flower gets fertilized and it makes the fruit, whatever it may be. So if you have on a plant that's all female, which if you look at that cucumber plant in front of you, note how every single flower on that plant has a little baby cucumber either behind it or developing, and that's because it's a gynoecious cucumber plant. All the flowers are female. And so that will really increase your yield, because if you consider that upwards of half of the flowers on a lot of cucurbit plants are male, so you don't even have a chance of harvesting a cucumber or fruit off of those flowers. Well, every single flower on this plant could potentially produce a cucumber. So that right there is going to increase your yield. Plus the fact that in protected culture, cucumber growing, a lot of times you prune off a lot of the side shoots, which in field production, a lot of the flowers are on the side shoots, so that the tendrils they grow off the main stem. So you can see with the plant in the picture, it's been pruned to a single leader. So there are a lot less chances for this plant to flower than, say, one that was left to run in the field. And so you need every single flower on the plant to be able to produce a cucumber when you're pruning them like this. So those are the two reasons why greenhouse plants, it's important for them to be gynoecious, or all female flowered. And the flip side of that coin is that they need to be parthenocarpic, meaning setting fruit without pollination. Because, of course, if you've got a greenhouse or a hoop house full of cucumber plants that don't have any male flowers on them, then there's not going to be any pollen. So typically, cucurbit plants are pretty smart. They will not put the energy into developing a fruit a lot of the time unless that fruit has been pollinated. So if you have a parthenocarpic plant, that means that it'll develop the fruit whether or not it's been pollinated. So not only is that very important for a fruit set in a greenhouse where you either may not have any male flowers in the first place if you're using gynoecious varieties, or particularly if you have them insect netted like I do, you may not have a lot of pollinators in there. So even if you planted a field variety that had male flowers on it, there might not be any insects to carry the pollen around. So it is important, and it's a big help to have parthenocarpic varieties that will set fruit and develop fruit whether or not they get pollinated. The other advantage of having parthenocarpic varieties is that the fruits, so the cucumbers in this case, they won't develop seeds, and that's important if you're trying to have the best tasting cucumbers. One of the things that people don't like about cucumbers is when they're developing or developed seeds. You know, nobody likes to bite into a cucumber and taste or feel those developing seeds in there. So that's an added benefit to using parthenocarpic varieties, is that they won't set seed as long as they don't get pollinated. So that makes the cucumbers just really sweet and juicy and tender without that the hard developing seeds in there, which people really like. So there are a lot of features in other crops besides cucumbers that are why they have the greenhouse varieties. You may have opened your seed catalog and thought, well, what's the difference between the greenhouse variety section and, let's say, the field tomato variety section? And a big part of that is disease resistance. So there are diseases like leaf mold, for example, which is very rarely seen in the field, but is very common in hoop houses, because it's a disease that tends to occur when the humidity is very high and the temperature is also high. And it's a kind of disease that once you get it, you pretty much have it for the rest of the lifespan of your structure. I know for the first 2 or 3 years that I grew in my hoop houses, we didn't have a speck of leaf mold. And after about 3 years, we got it once, and we've had it ever since. It's a spore transmitted disease, and once you have it, it's very difficult to ever get rid of it. And one of the only ways to deal with it is to use resistant varieties. For example, usually we grow about half greenhouse varieties, so red slicing tomatoes, bred for greenhouse production, and we grow half heirlooms. And leaf mold is the example of a disease where the resistances tend to work really well. The varieties that have leaf mold resistance don't get leaf mold at all under most circumstances, and the varieties that don't have resistance get it really bad. And so that's what will happen is from this time on in the season, I'll go into the hoop house and I'll see that the resistant varieties, so the greenhouse bred varieties, they will be clean. They won't have any leaf mold on them. And the heirlooms or the other varieties that I may have planted that don't have any leaf mold resistance, they will just be covered with leaf mold. And it's a disease that gradually takes the plant down. It's not a sudden death, but what it does is there's a fungus colonizing your leaf surface. And where the fungus has colonized the leaf can't photosynthesize anymore. So it is sapping the plant's ability to feed itself by gradually taking over the leaf surface that would otherwise photosynthesize, and then the leaf doesn't photosynthesize anymore. And you watch your plants just get weaker and eventually die and become unproductive. So there are a lot of adaptations, like the being parthenocarpic or gynoecious in cucumbers, disease resistance and extra vigor in tomatoes, or in lettuce, for example. Greenhouse varieties tend to be bred to be resistant to bolting, since you're going to tend to have higher temperatures in a greenhouse, and to withstand the higher temperatures better. So think about, especially if you haven't tried any, it's worth buying a little packet of some greenhouse varieties and trying them head-to-head to whatever your favorite variety is, because they really do have some specific adaptations that may help them to do better than, say, a field variety in a hoop house or greenhouse. So that brings us to the end of my presentation. And what I'm really interested in is what you have questions about. So I should be able to see some questions if you want to type in, and I would love to talk more.
Andrew, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Just a reminder to everybody, there's a chat function at the top right-hand corner of your screen. When you type into the chat, make sure you select send to everyone. Don't just send the question to me. You have to select send to everyone. Andrew, can I ask a question to start?
Sure, Brittany, go ahead.
So I had a question about actually the management of trellising in the high tunnel cukes. We're managing cucumbers right now, and I think a part of our issue is it's just a smaller greenhouse. It's 17 by 48, so it's just not that tall. And I find we're trying to do lower and leaning, and I find the maturing fruit gets lowered to the ground, and the cucumber is only about a foot. The top of the cucumber plant is only a foot and a half from where we've just lowered and leaned from. So we have what seems like only 36 hours, so we got to lower again, or it's up on the wire. I don't know if that makes any sense, or if it would be just be easier for you to tell me your strategy for trellising, and like either your weekly schedule or like what your schedule is for trellising.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Brittany. That's a very good point. Cucumbers grow so fast that it's hard to lower and lean them in a lower structure. Exactly what you just said. For example, those pictures of the hoop houses that I showed here, I'll try to go back to one of them. So this hoop house that you see here, these have extra long sidewalls. So if you build other hoop houses in the future, this is one feature that you might want to consider. It's not that much more, and all they do is they give you longer ground posts to make the whole structure taller than a normal structure. And what that does is that puts our top wire where we do our trellising at about 9 feet. And even that height, we have trouble keeping our cukes off the ground. Or we can do it, but we still have to lower and lean them more than we would like. And like you said, yeah, it's almost like you can lower and lean them one day and come back the next, and you have to do it again, because cucumbers in particular, they grow so fast that the head will reach the wire and need lowering before you're harvesting the fruit. And not only is that a pain to have to be going in there and lowering and leaning all the time, but you don't want that fruit touching the ground, because it could be dirty and get scratched up and everything. So I'm guessing, Brittany, that I think you hit the nail on the head, that probably your structures are just a little low for lowering and leaning cucumbers, and bigger greenhouses. The trend in greenhouses for vining crops in particular is to go taller and taller. So if you went to a cucumber greenhouse where they do lowering and leaning, they would be even taller. They would be like 12 or 15 feet up there. So there's another way of maintaining cucumbers that I would say, if you have a structure, Brittany, that sounds like what yours is, or maybe what other listeners have, that's a shorter structure, but you still want to trellis cukes, which I love. I love trellising cukes because I don't like bending over and having to shove the leaves out of the way to harvest them. And also it keeps the fruit so clean and straight when you have it trellised. There's another method called the umbrella method, where you grow the cucumber up to the top wire, and you top it when it hits the wire, and you let 2 or more shoots grow down from where you topped it. Now, there's not enough time to go completely into it, but there's some information about growing cucumbers. It's called the umbrella style, because you grow the shoot up to the wire, and then you let the two tendrils grow out from where you top the plant. So it's kind of like an umbrella. It grows up with one piece, and then it kind of umbrellas out with 2 shoots. So that is, if you want to look that up online, that you might be able to find some more instructions. And it's also lower labor than lowering and leaning, because as you've noticed, it's a lot of work keeping up with those cucumbers. And also, in the book that I have come out in the early winter, I have a detailed description of how to do spacing and how to do that umbrella-style cucumber growing. So that's one alternative that I would recommend, because it is hard to keep up with cucumbers in a shorter greenhouse.
Awesome.
So I did see someone who wrote in asking about the favorite English cucumber varieties. So there's a really old variety called Tyria, Tyria, which is very adaptable. It's not actually used in the industry a whole lot anymore, because it doesn't have a very modern disease package. But if you're not in a big cuke growing area, you might be able to use that. So that's Tyria. And another more modern variety that's a very robust variety that has more disease resistances. If you need stronger powdery mildew or downy mildew resistance, maybe some other diseases. I forget exactly what the disease package is. There is a cucumber called Kalunga, Kalunga, that is a really good long English cucumber variety. So we also like to grow Socrates. Socrates is an interesting variety because it's kind of halfway in between an English cucumber and a slicer cucumber, because it's about the size of a slicing cucumber, about 7 to 8 inches long, but it's smooth and doesn't have any spines, more like a long English cucumber. Because what I found is that some of my customers, they want a cucumber. They're used to buying slicing cucumbers, and so they want to buy something that looks like a slicer. But I personally prefer either the long Europeans or things like Socrates, because I think the flavor is better. The skin is thinner. There are no spines. And so, to my mind, Socrates is a way to give them something in the package that they're expecting to see. You know, it's more the size of a slicing cucumber, but it has the flavor advantages as far as I'm concerned of of one of those long European cucumbers. So those are some of the varieties that I like for that. And I see there have been some longer questions here. I'm trying to that I wasn't able to pick up on as they were being written in. So I'm going to try and find those. And if anybody else has more questions, I will try to get to them. Okay, so I see here there is a question from someone who says, thank you for all this information. I've tried searching on Google for record-keeping information for yield tracking and found lots out there. Can you recommend some? Also, any recommendation on weather tracking places? Any that cover most of what you need to record yield, price, variety, and weather? Thank you. Okay, that is a great question. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. In fact, there's a new program. It's a smartphone app. So I'm not sure if you can run it on desktop, but I just became aware of this, and it's called Beet Clock, BEETCLOCK, all one word, like beet that you grow in the ground and clock. And what it is it's a smartphone app that was developed by the farm manager of a farm in Pennsylvania because he had trouble tracking multiple workers doing multiple jobs. And so he made this smartphone app that can keep track of multiple workers doing multiple jobs, and you can also add in different pieces of equipment, and you can tie equipment and workers into any particular crop. Like let's say you had an early strawberry crop and a later strawberry crop, and you wanted to know how much labor went into the early strawberries versus the late strawberries. You can track each crop separately. And in fact, I wrote a short article about that for the August Growing for Market that is about to come out in just a few days on August 1st. But it is a really neat program for labor tracking. And you can it works as a time clock function. You can either start it while you have workers out in the field, and it will track how much time they're spending on any particular job, or you can retroactively enter the data. Like if you didn't think to start the clock when someone was out doing the job, as long as you have the records, you can enter them. And so it's called Beet Clock, www.beetclock.com. It's $4 to download. So it's very reasonable. You could try it out, and it is. I feel like it's really a neat piece of software, and it ties into the NOFA crop budgeting spreadsheet, which is, thank you, Brittany. Yeah, there's the link. It ties into the NOFA crop budgeting worksheet, which was designed by Richard Wiswall, who has decades of experience in small farming economics and wrote it's called the Organic Farmer's Business Handbook. Okay, so he pretty much wrote the book on business for organic farmers. So it is you can either have the data from Beet Clock go straight to a spreadsheet, or you can have it download straight into this crop budgeting spreadsheet made by Richard Wiswall, which I think is just brilliant, because that way you don't have to set anything up. You can have the data go straight to this spreadsheet, and that really helps you figure out how to figure out whether you're making money in a crop or not. And in fact, I talked to the guy who developed it down in Pennsylvania, and he said that he used it to decide when to stop harvesting his strawberries, because he tracked how much labor was going into picking the strawberries, and then he compared that to how many strawberries they were getting. And at some point the berries just kind of get picked out, and you end up putting more labor into picking them than berries you're getting out of them. So that is a great one. As far as the weather apps or programs, I don't know of one off the top of my head. What you might look to do is see which weather tracking hardware will have a program that will work the way you want it to, because some of the hardware, by hardware I mean there are these thermometers that you can stick out into a greenhouse, and they'll feed information either to a computer, to a spreadsheet. Oh, what's even more valuable sometimes is an alarm. Like they can either send an alarm even to a smartphone, so that if, let's say you set your alarm, you want to know if it's getting over 95 degrees in your greenhouse, you can get an alarm to tell you when the temperature is getting too high, so you can either go do other things to try to lower the temperature. So we have used some of those thermometers in my greenhouse, and honestly the brand and make escapes me right now. There are more than one good brand of the hardware as far as the thermometers and software for weather tracking. So I would say to look at the hardware and software options and find one that meets your needs as far as whether it can do mobile to your phone or just go straight to a spreadsheet or has whatever the options are that you want to do. So that seems to cover the questions that we got. I'd be happy to take one or two more if anybody has anything else. Oh,